Have you ever felt a little adrift? Like you're searching for some kind of solid anchor in a pretty chaotic world? Well, you are definitely not alone. And you know what's wild? In this widespread search for meaning, millions of people are turning to a surprising place, an ancient story. Today, we're going to dive into this modern meaning crisis and the re-examination of Christianity as a potential answer.
And look, this isn't just a feeling, right? It's a sentiment you hear echoing all over the place. There's this growing sense that all the things we were told would bring fulfillment, the career, the status, that radical independence, are leaving a lot of us feeling, well, kind of empty. Okay, so what does this meaning crisis actually look like on the ground? Let's dig into the data, because it reveals a really fascinating picture of a whole society that's just searching for something more.
Okay, so get this. Here's a fascinating paradox. While traditional church attendance has actually been declining, the data shows this surge in personal spiritual engagement. Bible sales just hit a 21-year high, Christian music streams are up big time, and way more adults are just reading the Bible on their own. It's like people might be leaving the institution, but they seem to be engaging with the source material more than ever.
And this search is hitting younger generations especially hard. A staggering 3 out of every 5 young adults report feeling like their life just lacks purpose, and this is directly linked to these soaring rates of anxiety and depression. They feel unanchored. So sociologists actually have a name for this. They call it expressive individualism. The idea is that true fulfillment comes from looking inward and defining our own truth. You know the vibe. You do you. Be your own brand. Create your own purpose from scratch. But that puts an immense amount of pressure on one person, and by kind of de-emphasizing community and shared stories, it can leave this profound void where a sense of belonging used to be.
Right, and this search for meaning didn't just happen in a vacuum. It follows the rise of new atheism back in the 2000s, a movement led by thinkers who argued that science had pretty much made faith obsolete. But for a lot of people, a purely materialist worldview, one that's just time plus matter plus chance, well, it left a big void when it came to those deep, nagging questions about purpose.
All right, so with that modern void as our backdrop, let's turn to the ancient answer. People are re-examining the Bible, a text that has, for better or worse, shaped Western civilization for millennia.
So, what even is the Bible? It's so crucial to get this right. It's not a single book. It's a library. A complex collection of history, poetry, law, and letters, all compiled over something like 1,600 years.
Broadly, you can think of it as being broken into 2 big acts. The Old Testament lays a historical and theological foundation, and then the New Testament documents the arrival and impact of a central figure, Jesus, and the whole movement that followed.
And this, of course, brings us to the fundamental question, the big one. Is this collection of texts a divinely inspired guide for humanity, or is it a series of compelling but ultimately human-made stories? For the modern, curious mind, simply taking it on faith probably isn't enough, so let's try to look at this text through a historical lens just like we would with any other ancient document.
So let's compare the historical record. You have Jesus, who has 4 main biographies, and that's actually the same number as his contemporary, the powerful Roman Emperor Tiberius. But look at the timing. Most of the sources on the emperor were written 80 years or more after his death. The Gospels, however, were written much, much earlier, well within the lifetime of eyewitnesses.
So let's really think about that time gap. Critics often point to this 40 to 60-year gap as a problem. But from one perspective, in the context of ancient history, that's an incredibly short period. It means people who actually knew Jesus were likely still alive and could have corrected a false account. Now, of course, scholars still debate the precise authorship and point to inconsistencies between the accounts, but that proximity in time is a key part of the historical argument.
And this context helps us understand why that telephone game analogy often falls short. I mean, that game is specifically designed to corrupt the message through private whispers. In contrast, ancient oral cultures preserved important stories publicly and repeatedly, where the whole community's goal was preservation, not distortion. Okay, so while the historical accounts can be tested and debated, the entire Christian narrative really hinges on one central claim that goes beyond history, a supernatural event you can't exactly prove in a lab. And this, of course, brings us to the resurrection, the central, most debated event in Christianity. If it didn't happen, the entire belief system arguably falls apart. But if it did, well, it changes everything.
So the core argument here shifts from physical evidence to human motive. First, consider the followers. They went from hiding in a locked room to preaching in the very city where Jesus was just killed. What could cause that kind of change? Second, liars make poor martyrs. They gain no wealth or power, only persecution and often death, which makes them pretty bad liars. And third, there's this kind of embarrassing detail. The first witnesses were women, whose testimony was not highly valued back then. Proponents argue that if you were just inventing a persuasive story, you would never tell it that way.
But the counter-argument, of course, is that humans are just wired to see patterns and believe in the supernatural. I mean, from the Loch Ness Monster to UFO sightings, we have a long history of mass belief in things for which there's absolutely no hard evidence. So the real question is, could this just be another example of that?
And maybe the greatest obstacle of all is a philosophical one, a question that has troubled thinkers for centuries. If a good, all-powerful God exists, why is there so much suffering in the world? It's a profound, gut-wrenching challenge that really defies any simple answer.
And that leaves us here. We've looked at the modern search for meaning, the ancient text proposing an answer, and the really strong arguments for and against it. This isn't about providing a final, neat conclusion. Instead, it really just turns the question back to you. In a world so full of doubt and uncertainty, what is the reason for the hope that you have?